Hi and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Karel van Heulen, Product Manager at Televic Conference, and today I'm joined by Didier Rosé. Today we are incredibly excited to bring you a webinar about combining wired and wireless Confida units. We can't wait to give you a first look at this. But before we dive in, just a little housekeeping. First of all, let us know if you can see the presentation and if you can hear us. Just give us a quick heads up in the chat on the right side of your screen. Okay, great. I'll briefly take you through the interface of our webinar so you'll feel right at home. On the left side, you will see our presentation, and you can use the button in the middle to go full screen. On the right side, you see 4 buttons. We have a 5th one, so we can see a list of all the participants. You can chat with us and give us feedback on give us feedback with the last button. The second last button is used for specific questions. So if you have a question, please type it here. Other participants can always upvote answers, and this allows us to see what the most important topics are. We'll go through the questions at the end of the presentation. So that's it. The webinar will take around 30 to 40 minutes, give or take. Our goal is to give you a short presentation of, let's say, 30 minutes, and then we'll take another 10-15 minutes to answer your questions. Now, without further ado, I'll turn the presentation over to Didier Rosé.
All right, thanks, Karel, for the introduction. Also from my side, welcome. Very glad to see so many of you. I think this is the first time that I have such an audience on my birthday. So thank you. I hope I don't have to pay drinks for all of you. But let's dive into the subject of today, how to combine both wired and wireless conferencing solutions in one project. So we have a couple of stations here on the table, but first we will dive a little bit into a small presentation, and afterwards we'll do a demonstration. So let's have a look at the presentation. So it's really about combining both wired and wireless solutions in one project. So we already had our wired flex solutions. Also, last year we introduced the wireless solutions, and now we have released a firmware update in order to combine those two in one project. Not only that, but that's already a unique functionality of the Televic conferencing solution, but also we have the capability of transferring languages wirelessly through the flex station. So that's also a unique thing that we have in our Televic portfolio. Now let's highlight and go over a couple of use cases where combining both those wired and wireless solutions really makes sense. And that's the really things that we've been hearing from the market itself, where those combinations of both wired and wireless really is an advantage. First of all, and in a lot of cases, architectural challenging rooms. We have rooms, for instance, a lot in the UK where they have classified furniture. They can't simply change anything to the floor. So it's really difficult to have cabling infrastructure. But also what we've seen over the years is that a lot of city councils have, or cities have grown. And with that also, the infrastructure that they need for their council chambers is expanding. And they had foreseen cable runs in the room. They have wired solutions, but now all of a sudden they need to extend the number of members for the council, for instance, and they need to add more units. That can be simply done now with a combination of wireless units in order to create one solution that can be controlled from one interface. Another thing that we've heard, fixed installations, but then you have a kind of speaker area where depending on the situation, you need to change the speaker desks to different positions. Also there, obviously, it's far more easy to just have a wireless station at hand, just put the speaker desk wherever you want and use a wireless flex station. The advantage there, you could say also, we can use another microphone for that. The advantage also there is that you have all the control over the microphones. If there would be a need to identify persons, so that it can be used for camera solutions, but also for metadata tracking, you can use the identification there on the speaker desks. So that's also the advantage that you have there. Also with the upcoming speech timers, for instance, if you have public speaking to that speaker desk, at least they can see also the speech time on their devices. So a lot of advantages there to also use it in speaker desk positions. Sporadic additions of more participants. You can have a room that, let's say, 20 to 40 people can be seated. You only have 20 fixed installations. You can simply add rolling tables with wireless to add and expand your number of participants. Also, in terms of inclusion, we've seen a couple of projects over the years where there are wheelchair positions in the room, and there also it's far more easy to give those persons wireless units so that they can also bring it closer to themselves. And also recently with COVID, a couple of times we've heard that within a city council space, if they bring in citizens to speak to council, they don't do it in the room itself, but have a wireless installed in an adjacent room where they just put the stations there whenever there's a need to. So that's something that we've also heard a couple of times since the COVID situations happened. So now how does that all connect? We already have our Plexus engine and then wired stations, daisy chained or looped on the Plexus network. I think this is already something that we all know. By simply adding the access point, as the access point was already foreseen with Plexus ports, you can also bring that access point on the Plexus engine over the Plexus network and then combine the wired and the wireless stations in one project. As soon as that access point is connected to the Plexus network, it will be picked up, shown as a device, and then you can couple those together. We'll have a short look at that, how it looks in the interface. The next use case, interpretation. We already launched last year, July, I think, the interpretation support for the access point through Dante. So that means whatever the languages that you inject on the Dante interface on the access point, those languages could be transferred wirelessly to the flex stations. So that's already one thing. Obviously, if you're using a Televic system, that could be the Lingua IDs that are connected to the engine, and then the routing from the channels would be done over the Dante network to the access point and to the flex stations. Could also be third-party channels that you inject for that reason. So that's the flexibility that you still have on that Dante capability, and that stays also available in the platform. Now, if you want to have really native interpretation, and that means that you don't have to do the configuration in your access point, you can simply also add an access point on the Plexus network, and then all the channels that are being configured from the Plexus engine automatically transfer, so all the configuration transfers to the wireless stations. One thing to mention there, and that's a small mistake from my side. So if you're using the Dante, as we have an 8x8, and you inject the channels on Dante, you have the floor plus 7 languages. If you connect the access point, you have really 8 channels. So that means floor plus 8 channels. And it's the first 8 channels that are defined on the Plexus network that are also transferred to the wired and wireless stations. So that's a small mistake that we'll have to adapt there. So that's it for the interpretation part. next use case where the wired wireless really comes into play is expansion. So expansion, the first thing that we can do here is enlarging the room. In standalone wireless projects, the access point was limited to 128 stations total. So that's really the standalone use case. Now, with the fact that we can couple an access point to a Plixus network, that also means that we can have several access points connected on that Plixus engine. So the engine takes over as a master, and then we can extend the number of stations to 128 units per access point. Okay? And this can be done for a maximum of 4 access points. So that's the limit that we have defined now, and that's 512 units total. This is currently, well, not currently, but this is tested in our factory in Bulgaria to really make sure that that maximum of 512 units that we have defined is also tested and ready to go. Okay, so that's the first part in the expansion use case. The second part is the expansion, but then in terms of larger room sizes, so extending the range. There again, we have a little bit the same principle. The maximum range of the access point in standalone is approximately 40 meters. If you go to the Plixus coupling with wireless, you can have several access points there to enlarge the space that you're using for the wireless stations. So an example, a ballroom, for instance, for rental applications where they need to extend, they have several tables, but spread out quite a bit. Definitely in that situation, the range extension really makes sense. What you see there also is that you can also loop access points. So also on that node, the access points follow the same principles as the Plixus network. The access point is also powered over the Plixus network, and that doesn't mean that you also can power it through the PoE Plus port. So you can also have, if there would be something with the Plixus power on the cable, it will also revert to the PoE Plus power from that perspective. So you can have both, and the system takes priority for the Plixus powered capabilities. All right. Next up is also something that is being validated now, but in terms of principle, similar approach there, and that's divisible rooms. So split combined parts of rooms. You have a room A, room B, with a divisible wall in between. There, the same principle counts if you're using room A and room B separate. The access point will run in a standalone mode, and that means that they each have their control interfaces. Now, if you want to remove the wall and act as one system, basically you couple the two access points to the engine. The engine becomes master of the room and combines room A and room B together. So from that perspective, you control one room, the audio is combined, all the configuration is taken over automatically. One side note there in terms of license files. So we all know that Flex works with licenses in order to unlock functionality. There, a small note, if you have split combined applications, we also need to provide a license file with the combined aggregated license files. So in order to have the two combined rooms also taken care of. So the aggregation of the licenses is not done automatically at this point in time. So a small note in order to notify us so that we can also provide that license file for the Plixus engine. So it's really about being Plixus and Cofero as cornerstone for this solution. As I mentioned before, the access point has 2 plexus ports, so that means that you can daisy chain them and loop back to the main brain of the plexus network. Architectural-wise, so we have the combination between wired and wireless. Simply connect the access point to the plexus network. If you need interpretation, you can have lingua devices also on the plexus network there to transfer languages to the wireless stations, and obviously also the wired solution. But also the same counts if you have a multimedia project. So if you have a multimedia engine, you can also simply combine multimedia devices, audio-only devices, wired, wireless, and then also interpretation. So really creating that flexibility to play with pricing, functionality, whatever there is a need to there. So really creating that ecosystem within the Plexus network. Now, also one thing to highlight here, we introduced earlier this year also our Confero camera tracking solution. That's also very handy in the situations that I mentioned, where you have wired and wireless, where you sometimes add additional stations, or you have a speaker position that changes sometimes from position. As our Confero Cam also supports multiple room layouts, you can pre-configure those situations and simply switch between one or the other. So that combination between wired, wireless, and the multiple room layouts really make that a unique solution from that perspective. So that's something that I wanted to highlight on top of this wired wireless discussion as well. Okay, time to have a look on what we have here on the table. Let me switch to the stations here. There we go. So let's have a look. I have 2 cards here. So what we have here on the table, we have our wireless flex station. We have a wireless station, the Plexus engine here, the access point, and then we also have a lingua interpreter desk. For the sake of demonstration, I'll just move this microphone to this one here. As you can see, connectivity-wise, I have the wired station connected to the Plexus network. I have the lingua ID connected to the network here, and then I have the other ports connected to the wireless access point. So really the Plexus network here, and then the LAN connectivity I've also connected for the sake of demonstration. All right. So as you can see, both stations work together. From a control interface, everything is combined. Now let's dive a little bit into the software and have a look on how that works from that perspective. So this is the Confero software. In the Confero software, I'm logged in here as technician. In the devices tab, you can see we have our Plexus engine, we have the lingua ID interpreter desk, a flex wired station, and then you see the access point turning up in the devices list as well. Under the access point, you will see all the connected wireless devices. In this case, we only have one. And how can you couple and uncouple the devices? Simply click on the 3 dots here, and I can uncouple the device, and that means that the access point will turn again to its standalone mode. So as soon as I do that, I'll switch back to the overview. You can see here you had also on the wireless station the picture that I defined here. As soon as I do the uncoupling mode, you see that it takes the picture that was defined in the access point, right? So again, here I'll now couple from the interface, and what you will see is that the device switches almost instantly also to the coupled mode from that perspective. So really simple in terms of coupling or uncoupling in those different situations. And then the same counts as we already know for the user interface. Looking here, you have in the devices tab, once you have coupled, you also see in the diagnostics page the access point and the wireless station with the identification of the battery status as well. Everything follows the discussion modes, so that's all similar. From a languages perspective, also everything that you combine or define on the interpretation tab is also transferred via the Plixus network to the stations. Oh, switch to the user interface here. So I'll quickly repeat. So here you have the diagnostics page where you also see the access point and the stations with the identification of the battery status. Languages can be defined here, and then automatically the configuration is also transferred so that it's available in the wireless stations. Switching to the operator view. So here again, also, if I activate a wireless station, I have now configured those that wireless station as a double station. So I have two microphones here, and then the wired station is the chairperson functionality. So as soon as I start a meeting, demo, start meeting, you'll also see that automatically it changes. Here I've done fixed seating, so that's myself as chairperson on the wired station. And then here you have the user interface to tap and log in. There you go, two identifications. So everything is combined in one solution. Same counts for voting, coupling. Do you like? There we go. Start, and you automatically also see that both wired and wireless have the combination of the voting as well. So that's really, it's very simple. As soon as you have combined it in the Confero technician page, you'll basically have no idea that there is wired and wireless units combined in the room. It's all transparent from that perspective. In the user interface, if there is a battery that runs low, that will also be identified here. So that's things that we've added in the new release as well. So the release is available on the website. So the latest version, so for both the access point and the Plixus engine. And as soon as you have that, the coupling capabilities are available. Also from the point of view of channel selection, so I already mentioned also interpretation through the Plixus network, access point, wireless stations wired. So here also this unit is defined as a double. You can also do language selection here. As mentioned, if coupled to the Plixus network, you can simply go up to 8 languages and then still have the floor as a separate channel, which is not available in standalone Dante mode. All right. So I think that was what we wanted to show here. So a little bit the different use cases where we see that wired and wireless is being combined. And also show you how simple it is to do that combination of the stations in the Confero software, where it's automatically discovered and you simply define if you want to couple the access point to the Plixus network or not. All right. Questions?
Well, I had a look already, so I guess the remark that has been made the most was "Happy birthday, Didier." Then we have another 4 questions. So I tried to answer already 2 of them. First of all, regarding power supply considerations, how many watts does your access point needs to have to function? So, well, there I said the typical consumption is 15 watts, maximum is 24 watts. Of course, has been powered over the can be powered over the Plexus network. Another question was regarding the wireless units. Can they be configured as a chairperson?
The wireless, yes. So there's same functionality. So everything that counts on the standalone wireless on the wired, that's always been similar. So in terms of licenses, all the same licenses count. You can configure the wireless station as a delegate chairperson or dual delegate, as I have demonstrated here today. So that's all transparent, doesn't really change. A couple of things that you have to take into account. For instance, there's some limitations if you couple the wireless and wired. We still have 2 different microphone types for the time being, so that's something to keep an eye on when you design solutions. And then also a couple of things that do not function, like we have the DSP mode on the wired flex stations, so basically on the engine. Due to bandwidth limitations, we don't have the individual channels that come from the wireless stations to the engine. So those are a couple of the limitations that are in place also when coupling and taking into account that. What does work is if you couple the access point to the engine. With the new smart audio features, we have gain sharing on open microphones. That also counts on the total of the combined wired and wireless modes. So that means that if you have a wireless, it's also taking into account in that gain sharing algorithm in the engine.
Okay. Thanks. Next question coming from Carsten is, when you have more than one access point, how does frequency selection happen? First question, and second question regarding that, how does initialization is done when more than 2 access
Good questions. Obviously, the access points need separate channels. As we have the automatic channel detection, it will auto-regulate that. You don't have to really take care about that. You can already, if you want to fix it, 1 channel in room A, 1 channel in room B, so that's definitely possible. And then in terms of setup, you need to do the discovery on access point A, bring in your stations, make sure that they are connected, close the discovery, and then do the same for the second room. And then as soon as that has happened and you want to use it in a combined mode, then simply as soon as you combine the 2 access points on your engine, then the configuration is automatically aggregated from that point of view.
Okay. Then another question from Willem Bakker, is channel management still done or still only available in uncoupled modes? So I think it's regarding with this first, with the other question. So channel frequency.
So the frequency management is done in the access point. It's not that the interface is taken over into the web interface of the access from the engine. That simply needs to be done on the access point as well.
Yes. Then a question about the delay. How long is the time delay between wired and wireless units?
So basically, there's you have the latency from the access point to the wireless, and that stays similar. So the latency of the wired is really minimal. So you can still count on that 16 to 18 milliseconds that we have on the wireless link there.
Yes. Then a question, when coupled, does the access point still have to be on the LAN network? So Plixus Port plus LAN network?
Well, it's something that we would recommend if you want to uncouple, for instance, if you want to do a firmware update of the wireless access point, that still you need to reach the LAN of the access point also for frequency management. So yes, and also there take into account if you connect the LAN connectivity, maybe also make sure to put it on a PoE switch. So if something happens with the Plixus power, it can also take over from there. So there's two things there to take into account.
Okay. Then a question from Televic France about the extra license you mentioned. Is it a unique price or depending on the different licenses installed?
So let's say you have 20 stations in room A. You have 30 in room B, you pay for the 50 licenses. As it's not automatically combined, we give a license for 20 in room A, 30 in room B for the standalone operation, and then also another license file for the Plixus engine with 50, so that the combined use case can also be done from that perspective.
Yep.
If you want to pay more, you can, of course, right? Maybe yes, for my birthday present.
And then a question about the Dante port. So can you clarify the Dante port again regarding the number of channels and the number of interpretation languages?
Yes, sure. So in standalone mode, we have released also the capability to have interpretation on the wireless station. So that's already from last year. There you could inject through Dante different languages. As we have an 8x8 in the access point, and we already use channel 1 for the floor, we only had 7 languages that could be injected and transferred wirelessly to the stations. With the architecture, wirelessly has been foreseen to really have 8 channels. So if you connect the access point to the Plixus network, then you get the floor plus 8 channels and not plus 7. So on Dante, standalone, floor plus 7, connected to the Plixus network, you get 1 extra, so floor plus 8.
Yes, okay. Then question about about the firmware version. So does the wireless flex also works on the 6.x software version, or is it only on the 7.x version?
So this, what we've been discussing here, is really on the is on the Confero side. So it's the 7.track. So both for the access points and for the Plixus engine.
Okay. How about battery life, battery management, battery hot swap?
Everything stays the same there, all similar. As I mentioned, the autonomy of the batteries. The stations are also seen in the Confero from the engine. So you can also see battery life there. If a station would go offline, that diagnostics is automatically transferred through the Plixus engine.
Yes. Okay. Then another question, maybe a last question. If we have 2 access points as primary and redundant, what is the time required for redundancy if the first one fails?
So the question here is if we have 2 connected to the access points. So it would be simply activating the power of your secondary access points. So it would be the startup time of your access point. Considering that you have already also configured those stations, obviously, and discovered by your backup station. If not, it's adding that access point and making sure that it's started up and the discovery is started so your units can connect to the access point. But I'm assuming if you want to do that backup access point, that you already pre-configured those stations on the access point.
Okay, I think we answered all of the current questions. Yes.
So one of the things there, maybe to consider, In case of you have that functionality for a backup access point. As you might know, there are also dip switches on the AER. So if you would put your backup access point on a separate Plexus port and you switch off the power there, as soon as something happens, you can switch on the Plexus port from that secondary access point, and then automatically it would start up. So that's just one of the things that would be possible from that perspective if you think about that.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Thanks. Quite sure that all of you learned a thing or two. We've really worked hard on this combination of wired and wireless, and we also see already quite some interesting projects popping up. If you would have additional questions, do not hesitate to contact us, and then we will gladly help you further in designing your solutions. So for now, I would say if it's still morning for you, have a wonderful day. For those people that are late, I saw a couple of people from Canada and also Asia. I would say have a great evening and see you next time. Thank you.